One time I was sitting down for breakfast with my closest friend, and we started having a discussion around the ego and talking about the grips that the ego gets on us and the tension it creates in our life. And if there's so many books and so many spiritual books that refer to the ego, and in the spiritual community, and in spirituality and in spiritual teachings, when we talk about the ego, we tend to know what the ego is, but I tell you what, I've never really heard it completely described in a way that just makes sense for me, maybe up until this point. And I'm starting to get clearer and clearer about what the ego is and the role it plays, and what it's for, and more importantly, I guess, is the ways that it inflicts, in some cases, inflicts suffering on our life when it's not managed, when it's not understood, when it's not embraced, when you don't have a great relationship with your ego. And that's what I want to talk about on today's podcast episode, is not just maybe describing a little bit about the ego, but the three ways that I've experienced in my own life, the way the ego has caused some suffering, caused some struggle, and caused some pressure that was unnecessary, that is unnecessary. But when you don't understand the grips that the ego could have on you, it's hard to not be contained and be pressurized by the ego. And I guess the best way, in my latest book that I released in August of 2025, on my birthday, August 19th, 2025, chapter 2 is called The Ego and the Soul. And even in that chapter, even though in my opinion, it's an amazing book, and I've been told by a guy that read hundreds and hundreds of personal development books, this was in his top 3. Inner World, Outer World is in his top 3. It's a great book, and it will liberate you and help you liberate yourself from from the pressures of life and stress and tension, and get into alignment with who you are and who you came here to be, and the purpose that you came here to serve. But even in chapter 2 about the ego and the soul, I don't do a great job of talking about the grips of the ego. And that's what I want to do today. But inside that chapter, I do talk about the ego is the fear-based part of your humanity. It is the part of your body, the part of your makeup, the part of your vehicle that succumbs and is led by fear. And you can also say, as I've evolved and as I've grown, the ego is also, the nervous system, and that's also the unconscious. And these are all kind of the same things, and they all have one thing in common, and one purpose in our life, and that's to keep us alive. All right. The ego, which I like to look at the ego and the nervous system as the same, but I also have a visual of the ego that is very useful for me, and I'm gonna take you on that journey a little bit. I read a book one time called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers by Debbie Ford, and inside The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, she has a lot of exercises and a lot of guided meditations. And in one of her guided meditations, she takes you into an elevator and starts to drop you into the lower levels of your subconscious. And it's like you take an elevator as far down into the depths of you as you could possibly get. And it's on this elevator you go looking for, the ego. You go looking for the ego, and when you find the ego, you find it, and you start to get a visual of what it looks like. And what you're really trying to do is get a visual representation of, what your mind's eye would have the ego look like. And when I did this exercise, I got off the elevator and I started walking through this dark wasteland of a room and of an area. and it almost looked like a movie where there was water dripping from the ceiling, and there was leaks and cracks in the walls, and the foundation was cracked, and it was just a dirty, damp, dank place. And I was also represented when I did this meditation. It was also representative of how I felt on the inside as well. And as I navigated this room and as I walked around, what I saw in my visualization, in my meditation, was I saw Gollum. And if you've ever watched Lord of the Rings, you know what I mean by Gollum. But I saw Gollum and he was huddled up in a corner, and he was green. He was really bright green, and he was ugly, and he was hairy, and he was nasty, and he was huddled up in a corner, and he couldn't make himself any smaller, and he was shaking. It was like visually and visibly shaking from fear, and like kind of growling and watering at the mouth, and had I don't know, mucus coming out of his nose and his face. But he was huddled up in the corner, and he was shaking and just full of anxiety, full of fear, full of panic, full of just, yeah, he was so frightened. And when I went to meet Gollum, and I went to meet my ego, right? That was the visual representation of ego. Inside of this meditation, you got to play with, and relate with ego a little bit, and almost, with this expression, you call it ego Mike, but with this ego expression, you got to relate with it and tell it, talk to it and say, hey, it's okay, we're safe, you are safe. You've been hurt, you've been abused, you've been victimized, you've been manipulated, you've been hurt, you've been tortured during the course of your life. And there's no longer that level of danger in the world. And it's okay to come out from the corner. And it's okay to come out and not live in absolute horror or anxiety and fear. And inside of this meditation, I got to relate with the ego a little bit. The Gollum, which represented my ego. And from there, you start to develop a healthier relationship with ego. All right. And what ego represents in that visual, what ego represents is not just the fear that's inside of me, but it's how I relate with that fear, and what my insides, what my darkness, what my shadows actually represented, and what they felt like, and how I experienced them deep inside the recesses of my subconscious. And at that moment, and we're talking about 7-8 years ago when I did this visual and this meditation, I was in a very, very dark place. Probably 8 or 9 years ago, I was in a very dark place, and my life was in transition. And I didn't feel good about myself. I didn't feel valuable. I didn't feel worthy. I did feel like I've been tortured my whole life. And I did feel like life was just a big punishment. And that is why Gollum inside of me, and Mike ego, or ego Mike, that's why he was so huddled up and shrunken, is because it was like he had been beaten down his whole life. And ever since that, there's been a long time since that visual, a long time that I really didn't relate with Gollum or do any work around Gollum. But, Mike ego Mike. But lately, it's really been rearing its head, and it's been something that I've been sitting with, because I realized back in, I had a couple of years of tremendous business growth where we had workshops, we had a series of workshops, and we just kept adding new students to my mastermind. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I went from approximately 15 to 20 students up to 75 in a course of a year. And when we had our retreat in Miami, there were 55 people in this retreat center. It was like everything that I always wanted. And there were, I've got a picture of them all wearing their Inner Wealth shirts, and just a house full of students. And they were all there to do, work within the Inner Wealth Mastermind and my business, Inner Wealth Global. And I got to lead, and I got to see them and inspire them and have them connect. And it was just the most amazing retreat experience that I could ever imagine. And the 2 years leading up to that built that mastermind. But then the 2 years after that retreat, it it declined quickly. And it was almost like it was just falling apart and there was nothing I could do about it. And I kept marketing in the same ways and I kept promoting in the same ways. And people were leaving faster than they were joining. And before you know it, that 15 to 20 people mastermind that blew up to 75 was back down. And right now we are back down around 20. And that's been a very, very humbling experience for me. Very humbling. In some cases, it's been embarrassing because, I didn't do a whole lot to build it back in the day. I was getting invited by people to come and speak on their stages. And when I spoke on the stages, my audience started growing. And then when my audience grew, I would launch workshops. And those people that seen me speak and were already looking up to me as a, as a figure, as a public figure, as someone who's a teacher and someone who's intense in teachings about personal power and personal sovereignty and having personal authority over yourself and your life. When they saw that, and I already had that level of credibility in their eyes because of the stages that I've been on, they joined my workshops, and from there they converted pretty easily into my mastermind. And then the craziest thing happened. I stopped getting invited to people's stages, and all the invites and all the speaking engagements over the last few years have kind of dried up. They've slowed down where they were coming at me so fast for a period of time. And I didn't do anything to make them come. And lately, I haven't done anything to make them start up again. And as I do the same things and even more to try to rebuild what was one time a machine of a mastermind that was financially lucrative, that was impactful in the world, that was the match, the dream that I had in my mind. As I did what I did before, when I continued to do what I'd done before, even more, nothing seemed to work. And it was almost like there was this feeling of helplessness that consumed me and started to take over. And it created some depression, it created some embarrassment, it created some shame, and I got to experience these things over probably the last 2 years. It's been a little strugglicious in terms of what I saw was my ego build an identity around the success that I had. And I'm saying that on purpose. My ego, Gollum, built an identity around success that I didn't necessarily create myself. I got invited by people to come and speak on their stage. I spoke on the stage. People joined my my audience, and from there, when I invited, they just naturally and easily joined my workshops. I didn't do anything exceptional in order to build it. So then when I couldn't continue to build it because I had never really built it before, when I continued to build it, it was like there was a part of me that felt like a failure because my ego had built an identity around the success that I had over those 2 years, over the course of 2 years, that I really did nothing to create. And that's important. I don't feel like I did anything to create the success. And then I felt like a failure because I couldn't continue with that successful pattern. And lately, where I'm going with all this, lately I've been exploring those 2 years leading up and the growth, and then the 2 years that were after, and the contraction and the compression of the mastermind and of the business, and realizing that my ego inflated over the 2 years that the mastermind was building. And then my ego took lots and lots of hits and bumps and bruises and got bloodied over the course of 2 years as it came back down to the size that it was before the growth that I didn't necessarily do anything to create. And it's been a valuable lesson. And in some cases, I feel like I'm a canary in a coal mine where I feel like I go out and I experience all these trials and tribulations and these experiences that give me the knowledge and give me the wisdom of the lead into those punishing circumstances, and then the resolution, the things, the new beliefs, the new perspectives, the new trajectory that eventually helps me transcend those challenges and obstacles. And then from there I get to teach, because that wisdom that I possess, the wisdom that I possess, comes from experience, not from knowledge, not from a book. It's real life, real life experience. And I'm sure if you've listened to any episodes of this podcast, I teach from experience, not from theory. I don't teach from a book. I teach from my life. It's easiest for me to teach from my life. And lately, I've been getting back into re-engaging with my ego, with Gollum, making peace with that fear-based part of me, and starting to try to understand what the hell happened over the last couple of years, over the last, let's say, 4 years, and what have I learned from it. And I've learned that when ego, as I started to become successful, right, as the success started to build, so did my ego inflate. And the ego inflation caused three things. Okay, so these are the three signs and the three experiences that you'll have, and the three, I guess, ways of living that you'll experience when your ego is taking control. Number one is that you try to control everything. The ego thrives off of control. And the ego tries to control things that it has no chance of controlling. And on other podcast episodes I've done, because I've been learning this lesson over the last 10 years, is the lesson is control what you can control, influence what you can influence, but never, ever try to control what you only influence. And I can control the outbound marketing. I can control the outbound messaging, but I can't control people saying yes and opting into my programs. I can't control people joining my workshop. I can't control people joining my mastermind. The only thing I could do is controlling the message and how the invitations I'm making and things that are outbound. I can control what's happening in my body and the choices and the decisions I'm making about how I show up in life. I can control that. But the ego in the shadow state, when you're coming from a place of fear, the ego tries to control everything, what it can control and what it cannot control. And when you try to control things that you only influence, all it does is lead to extreme amounts of pressure, stress, and tension in the body. And you start to try to figure out what can't be figured out. And you try to get people to say yes when they really want to say no, because you feel like the ego feels like it should be in control and it should have everything figured out. And not only should it control what the outcome, but it also should control how it happens and the timing of when it happens. So the number one sign that you're operating from ego is you're trying to control everything, including things way outside of your control. And the human ego does not like to admit or acknowledge that there are things outside of its control. Number two is when you're operating from ego, you try to control your appearance, you try to control how people see you, and you try to control how people perceive you. And back in Nashville, I did our Nashville retreat a few episodes ago. I talked about my Speedo journey and my Speedo experience. And all that was beginning the process of loosening the ego's control over my nervous system and how I was perceived and how I was seen in the world. And then Angie and I went to Cancun, and that inner noise wasn't there, that languaging, that internal chatter wasn't there about how I looked in my body and how I looked in my swimsuit and what if people were looking at me. So it's like the ego from just doing that Speedo adventure and with teaching in front of my students at Nashville Retreat. I taught in front of them in a Speedo while I was telling them how freaking awfully frightening it was and how embarrassed I was to be seen in my full form in my body. And as I taught in a Speedo, the ego started loosening its grip on me and how I'm seen in that Speedo or in my body. But when you take a look at it, going back to Miami and that retreat, I've got this one picture where we're on the steps of the mansion that we stayed in, and there were 55 of us in this picture, and almost everybody's wearing an Inner Wealth shirt. And it's like that was an image and a graphic representation of that I used, and I used it a lot to show how awesome I am. Ego, trying to control how I'm seen and how I'm perceived. I would show that picture to show how successful and how accomplished I was. It was an ego stroke. That picture served as an ego stroke for me. And when I teach in workshops and we have pictures, I always want the angle that show that there's a lot of people in the room. These are ego strokes. This is the ego trying to control how you're seen. Control the appearance that you have, that you portray in the world. Try to control your identity, how people perceive you. Branding is a form of ego, of how you're perceived, of how the market perceives you, of how the market thinks about you. And at one point I went from, I talked in prior episodes, I've talked about my wardrobe, my clothes collection. And what I would do is go out and I would find a shirt that I find comfortable, like this shirt that I have on. You've probably, if you've watched this episode or if you've watched this podcast, you've seen this type of shirt many, many times because I wear them a lot. But I would find a shirt that I really enjoyed, that I felt comfortable in, and I would go out and buy one of every color. And then I would end up only wearing black. Or I would rotate through other colors, even though I just wanted to wear the black one because I love wearing black. And then after I realized that I was trying to control people's perception of me I can't wear the same color, the same shirt, the same color every day because they're going to think I didn't wash my clothes. And then I started to build, I started to let go of the hold that had on me. And I would go out. I own four copies of this same exact shirt. And if you're not watching, if you're paying attention on Apple Podcast or Spotify or any other of the audio versions, it's my long sleeve built shirt with the hood and the strings. You've seen it many, many times if you've seen me on social media or you've seen me speak or whatever. You've seen this shirt many, many times, this version. But I have 4 of them, all black, because I'm no longer worried about how people perceive me and if they think I'm washing my clothes, because I've worked through that ego madness. And now it's almost like it's pegged the other way. And now my ego won't allow me to wear other colors because my identity is built around wearing a black shirt. So the ego took that ego dissolution and it took it in a different way. And now, no disrespect to anyone, but you've got teenagers and people in their early 20s getting lip injections and getting body work and, putting filters and their appearance and trying to sculpt on social media, trying to show up and try to be seen a certain way. And it's like they're already in a place of shame in their body. Their ego's already protecting their image in their body in their late teens and early 20s. What is it going to look like when they're 60 and 70? And this is all ego control and ego manipulation to try to control how they're seen, try to control their appearance, try to control their identity, and try to control how they're perceived. And I've seen a lot of this over the course of the last 4 years as my mastermind built and as it dissolved. So, number one way that the ego exerts control is to try to control outcomes. Number two is how you are perceived and how you're seen. And the number three thing that ego tries to do and causes you to navigate the world in a state of avoiding discomfort. And it only tries to keep you in a place, in a state that is comfortable and familiar. And you've heard me, if you've listened to any episodes, any number of episodes, the nervous system / the ego has one goal and one goal only, is to keep you alive. It keeps you alive by trying to keep you in familiar circumstances. And it tries to keep you in familiar circumstances because it knows how to keep you alive there. And that is the grip of the ego. As long as it can keep you in between the lanes of certainty and keep you in certain and familiar circumstances, then it can keep you alive. And that's when Gollum can not shake so much in the corner of the room. And over the past few years, all three of these have been prevalent in my life. Try to control outcomes that I can't control, that I only influence. Try to try to control how I'm perceived, my identity, and how people see me, my appearance in the world. And at times trying to avoid the discomfort just by getting the water level of the business and of the money and of everything back to the level where it was, because that had become the new familiar. And now less feels unsafe. And that puts a hit on the ego. And then the ego goes into action to try to get back into a place of familiarity and control the outcomes so that we can be seen a certain way. Guys, the question I ask of you and for you and with you is, how much do you allow the ego to control your life? Because in Inner World, Outer World, which I would encourage you to grab a copy because it's a really, really good book, and it is my soul work. It's not just a work. It's a work of art from my soul. It's an expression of my soul. What I'll tell you is, the louder the role the ego plays in your life, the quieter the soul. And the more we turn down the volume of the ego, the louder the soul leads, lives, and shows up in the world. And you ultimately, this thing that we are in the world, we have a body, you have a body, you have a mind, but you're neither of those. You are the soul. You are the awareness inside of that body, using the supercomputer of a mind to navigate the earthly realm. But the more you operate as the ego, the less you will allow the soul to be in control, and the more strugglicious your life will be. Are you ready to start making peace, not fighting the ego, but making peace with it, and helping that fear-based part of you feel more and more safe over time? And as you feel more safe, that ego volume turns down, and I guarantee you the volume of your soul is going to turn up, and that is where you'll find your greatest fulfillment. Because when the soul is leading, there only is fulfillment, and the fear dampens and turns way down, and we can acknowledge that it's there, but we don't have to let it lead the charge and lead the show. If fear is leading the way, so is ego. It's time to come to terms and come to grips with it, make peace with it, and let the soul become the leader of your life.